My name is Bella. I am 26 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life in a world where each day begins with the silence of keys, with the pulse of electricity in your fingertips, with code arranged in lines like poetry, only understandable only to those who live among logic and algorithms. I worked as a programmer at a tech company that most people had only heard of at industry conferences and read about in the news, and we created software for the largest corporations, the ones that dictated the rules of the game in the market. I didn't just write code, I lived it. And I was good at it. No, I'm not exaggerating, I was really good. I took on those projects that others refused, cumbersome, risky, with crazy deadlines and complex architecture. Such tasks paid more, but it was not only about the money. I loved challenges, I sought them out, as if through them I wanted to prove something, to myself. To them. Everyone. Only my friends knew how big it was. My friends were the same hoodie-wearing, tired-eyed introverts I was, and they knew what it took to stay at the office until 3 in the morning to find a memory leak in millions of lines of code. But my family didn't care. They were long gone from my life, or maybe I was long gone from theirs. I hadn't spoken to them in 8 years. Not a call. Not a card. The emptiness I'd grown accustomed to. So imagine my surprise, my almost physical shock, when one evening, on a perfectly normal Tuesday, the phone rang. The number was unrecognizable, but something inside me twitched. I picked it up, and a voice, trembling as if it were burning with inner tension, said, "Hi, Bella." It was Sarah, my cousin, the only relative who had my new number. I could tell right away that she was having a hard time talking. "Your parents are looking for you," she said, pausing between words as if each one weighed more than she could bear. "They want you home for Christmas." It was as if the air had been ripped from my chest. I almost dropped the phone. It slipped in my hand and I clutched it like an anchor, not believing my ears. Christmas was in 2 months, and only now they were looking for me? "What do you mean, they're looking for me?" I choked out, sinking down onto my old, worn sofa, the same one that creaked with every movement, as if it knew all my secrets and worries. Sarah answered quietly, almost in a whisper, "They'd been asking around. They really want you there this year. And before we continue, write in the comments what city you're watching this video from. Enjoy." I stared at the ceiling, at the paint stains, at the cracks, like a map of my thoughts, and tried to make sense of what I had heard. Never before had my parents tried to find me. Never asked. Never written. Never called. It seemed unreal, as if someone had rewritten my life without my knowledge. "Okay," I suddenly heard my voice, calm, as if it was not coming from my mouth, but from somewhere else. "Tell them I'll be there." And while Sarah was saying goodbye, I was already sitting in the silence of my apartment, surrounded by sounds that no one else could hear, the ticking of an old clock, the rustle of the wind outside the window, the echo of a memory that, as it turned out, had never gone away. The memories came rushing back like water rushing through a cracked dam. I had always been the weird girl, the one who couldn't make friends, who didn't understand how to be normal, and who would rather sit in the corner with a book than try to participate in a conversation where every word felt foreign to me. My parents took me to a psychologist. I remember them thinking there was something wrong with me. Not because I was sad or moody, but simply because I was different. The psychologist was kind, with non-judgmental eyes. I think her name was Dr. Martinez. I was 12 then, and I still remember sitting in her office, trying to make myself smaller, literally withdrawing into myself, when she turned to my parents and said, "A lot of Bella's problems stem from emotional abandonment. You clearly favor your older son." The reaction was predictable. My mother exclaimed, "That's ridiculous. We love both of our children equally." But I knew then that Dr. Martinez was right. I could feel it in my bones. And they knew. They just didn't want to admit it. My brother, Jake, was everything I wasn't: confident, charismatic, a favorite of teachers and relatives. He was 3 years older, and he could turn me into a shadow with a single glance. He treated me like an annoying little thing, like a bug that didn't have to be squashed, but could be ignored. My parents idolized him. Even my grandparents, my mother's parents, treated us differently, as if they had a scale of importance on which I fell short. Jake got expensive gifts, some super modern toys that everyone talked about at school, and I got fake Chinese dolls whose arms broke by the third week. But the worst were family gatherings. Jake held court, telling stories that made everyone laugh until they cried, while I sat in the corner, a shadow, an empty space, an invisible girl. That's when I discovered programming. After school, I started going to a computer club. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The other kids there were like me, quiet, thoughtful, much more at home in front of a screen than in the company of people. We became friends. Real friends. One boy helped me build my first computer from old parts that someone had thrown away. And then the magic began. I wrote code at home, spent hours, losing track of time, learning languages, solving problems, as if all this was not just learning, but an escape. And then the teacher, Mr. Chen, said something to me that I will never forget. You have real talent, Bella. When I turned 16, I already knew exactly who I wanted to be and what path I had to take, and unlike many of my peers who were still torn between the dreams imposed by their parents and the fear of their own desires, I felt almost physically sure that my place was in the world of computers, logic, code, and those solutions that bring order to chaos. I was going to college to become a programmer, and I was already imagining how I would live on campus, how I would immerse myself in my studies and finally belong only to myself and not to someone else's expectations. Whereas my brother Jake had just been accepted to an expensive private college in another state, prestigious to the point of nausea, with walls soaked in money and ambition, and, of course, his entire education was fully paid for by his parents. There was no hesitation, no discussion of budgets, just everything he wanted, everything he had ever mentioned, became reality, and it seemed there were no limits, no need to earn anything. And then came the family dinner that changed everything. Everything. I remember the smell of roasting turkey, the clink of dishes, the buzz of conversation around the table, and all the relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, gathered together as if it were a ritual to celebrate the success of one man, Jake. Dad raised his glass, his voice solemn, with a pride he had never felt for me. We are so proud of Jake. As if on cue, everyone applauded, someone even shouted, "Bravo," as if my brother were not a student, but had saved the world. He was going to study political science at State University and pursue some career that no one really knew anything about, but it didn't matter. The main thing was that he was Jake. And then Mom turned to me, her face still beaming with a smile, but there was no warmth or recognition in her voice, just a dry statement. As for Bella, we don't have the money for her education. And the silence in the room was almost physical. Someone stopped chewing, someone looked away. After she finishes school, she'll have to get a job. I felt the blood rush to my face, my ears burning with humiliation, at how easily and publicly I had been written off as a prospect. And Uncle Frank laughed. Hey, I could use a dishwasher in my cafe, and that stupid, rude comment made everyone laugh, even my parents, and I sat there, speechless, as if my presence was unnecessary, as if my future could be reduced to a humiliating joke. The day after graduation, my mom knocked on my door, her voice casual, like she was commenting on the weather. You need to start looking for a job, and then, after a pause, and honestly, it would be better if you found your own place. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her and said quietly, I'm leaving now. What they didn't know, and probably never would have believed, was that I'd already been accepted into a prestigious computer science program, and not just accepted, but given a full scholarship. Free dorm room, free tuition, everything covered, my grades, my tests, my work. I'd done it on my own, with no help, no praise, no encouragement. But I didn't tell them. Why? To hear more sarcasm? To watch them brush me off? No. I just packed up and moved in with my friend Lisa for a few weeks before school started. I got a job at a local coffee shop, not Uncle Frank's, thank you very much, and saved up. I loved earning my own money, even if it was just a little, even if it meant I had to work my butts off at night. And then I moved to another state, went to college, and threw myself into school. The years of hard work, the sleepless nights, the project after project, the lines of code that kept me awake, it was all worth it. I graduated with honors, and right out of college, I was hired by a tech company, a big, modern one with bright offices and plenty of creative freedom. Even then, they started taking me on tough projects, the ones that would determine the future of the company, and the pay was outrageous, especially compared to what most of my classmates were making. Now, 4 years later, I was among the best. Not just good, among the best. They trusted me with projects that no one else wanted to take on, and I delivered. My salary and bonuses were impressive. And now, I was about to return to the people who once couldn't wait for me to leave. 2 weeks flew by. I had completed my last project, a large-scale systems integration for one of the tech giants, and the deal had paid off handsomely. My bonus was huge. So big that I could buy a house, a real, grown-up one, with its own walls, its own light, its own silence. I called a realtor, and within a few days she had found the perfect apartment for me. 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, a large balcony, a safe neighborhood. And so, at 26, I became a homeowner. 2 weeks before Christmas, I threw a small housewarming party. Only my real friends, those who knew my story, who had seen me grow up, how I overcame everything that had happened. We were sitting in the living room, on the new couches, with glasses of wine, eating takeout straight from the boxes, laughing, and Lisa, the same one who had taken me in at 16, raised her glass to Bella, who proved them all wrong. We clinked glasses, and I smiled, not the forced smile of the past, but a real one, with warmth, with inner confidence. In a week, I would be meeting my family again. But this time, I was not the scared, broken girl. This time, I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. The week before Christmas, I took the day off from work and started packing. I bought everyone presents, something nice but not fancy, nothing flashy or flamboyant. I didn't want to show off how well I was doing. I wanted everything to be calm, reserved, respectful but not ostentatious. The drive to my parents' house took 6 hours. As I pulled up to the old 2-story colonial house, the same one where I had once spent my entire childhood, I immediately noticed how much the place had changed, and not for the better. The paint on the walls was peeling, revealing gray, tired wood in places. The gutters were sagging, as if they had given in to the weight of time, and the front steps creaked even in the light wind, as if reminding me of every day lived without a care. 8 years had not been kind to this house, nor to its inhabitants, I thought, turning off the engine and getting out of the car. I picked up my suitcase and carefully straightened the gift bags in my hands. I was still trying to remain respectful, even if I did not expect it in return. My hands were shaking, although I tried to hide it. The trembling did not betray fear, no, but the excitement that arises before the inevitable clash with the past. When I rang the doorbell, the sound echoed in my ears, and a moment later I heard footsteps approaching, cautious, hesitant, as if the door itself wasn't sure whether to let me in. It swung open and my mother appeared, squinting slightly at my face, as if she couldn't immediately believe that I, the one whose name had probably only been whispered here, was standing before her. "Bella, my God. Is that really you?" she breathed, and her voice was a mixture of surprise and guilt and something else, elusive, like the echo of unspoken words. She hugged me awkwardly, pressing carefully, as if afraid I would dissolve. "You look different," she said, and I saw her gaze slide over my face, my hair, my coat. I walked inside and was immediately hit by a familiar smell, a combination of old carpet, stale air, and my mother's papism, the same aroma that was imprinted on my memory like the smell of a distant, restless childhood. The living room was crowded with relatives, faces painfully familiar, and all conversations instantly died down as soon as they saw me. "Look who decided to show up," someone whispered from across the room, and another voice, a little louder, murmured, "Is she in her pajamas?" I glanced automatically at my outfit, designer jeans, a black cashmere sweater, laconic and tasteful, nothing provocative, but perhaps I really did look out of place for them, too casual, too unfamily-like. My mother led me into the back of the room. "Guys, Bella's here," she announced, as if introducing an uninvited guest. The relatives smiled stiffly, falsely, waving their hands with polite reluctance. Nothing had changed. And then a voice came from the kitchen, as smug as it had been 8 years ago. Well, Well, look what the cat dragged in. Jake walked into the room, beaming as always, half a step ahead of everyone else, his arm around the pregnant woman. "This is Ashley, my wife," he announced proudly, as if it were a graduation with honors. "And this," he placed his hand on her belly, "will be your niece or nephew." I nodded and said, guardedly, "Congratulations." Jake looked me up and down, his lips curling into a familiar half-smile. "So, what are you doing now?" "Still hiding in corners, avoiding people?" Several of the relatives chuckled guardedly. I felt my cheeks begin to heat up, but I held back. "I work in tech," I replied calmly. "Oh, a tech, huh? Fixing computers?" "Like, tech support," he turned to Ashley. "Bella's always been antisocial. Probably works in the basement somewhere." I simply nodded. "Something like that." Mom quickly changed the subject, clapping her hands. "Well, dinner will be ready soon. Bella, why don't you put your things away?" Her voice became businesslike, as if this was not a long-awaited visit from her daughter but a logistical task. "Jake's using your old room as his office now, so you'll be sleeping on the couch." Of course he was. And of course I would be. Everything was in its place. All evening, like clockwork, relatives approached me with their passive-aggressive comments, veiled questions, politely packaged shots. Aunt Helen, still as sarcastic as I remembered, cornered me at the punch bowl, waving her glass. "Your brother's starting his own business, you know? A real entrepreneur." "What else do you do?" I paused and replied, "I write code." She wrinkled her nose as if I'd said something unpleasant. "Well, someone's got to do the boring work, I guess." Later, while dinner was being prepared in the kitchen, Uncle Frank sat down next to me, smelling always of garlic and tobacco. "I still have an opening for a dishwasher at my restaurant. Minimum wage, but it's honest work." Without looking up, I replied calmly, "Thanks, but I'm fine." He shrugged, as if I'd missed out on a great opportunity. At dinner, I was seated at the far end of the table, practically on the edge of the kitchen, where the smell of fried onions wafted past the main conversation. Jake sat in the center, like an emperor, waving his arms and talking about his grandiose business plans. He was starting a company that would revolutionize an industry, he said, and all he needed was a little seed funding. "How much do you need?" Dad asked, not hiding his pride. "About 200 grand to start," Jake replied. I nearly choked on my water at the ease with which Jake said that number. $200,000 for a business plan that sounded eerily similar to every failed startup I'd ever read about or heard about in tech circles. Each of his words was so predictable that I almost knew what phrases would follow: that the market was ripe, that we will blow up the niche, that the consumer needs it, and, of course, that there is simply not enough startup capital. And then, as if according to a script, Mom, with her eternally soft voice, patted Jake on the hand and said, "We will think of something. Family helps family." Words that I probably would have liked to hear at 16, but they sounded now, not for me. After dinner, when the guests began to slowly gather, exchanging hugs and unspoken phrases, Mom showed me the sofa in the living room, covered with an old blanket, the smell of which was painfully familiar to me. I lay down, feeling the cold from the pillow, probably stuffed with the same padding polyester as 10 years ago, and stared for a long time at the ceiling, into which all those conversations that we never had were written. Christmas morning arrived, and the first thing I heard was the thunder of Jake and Ashley's footsteps, racing down the stairs as if they were 7 years old again. Mom and Dad were already in the kitchen, and I could hear the coffee dripping into a glass flask, filling the air with that cozy, familiar aroma. "It's time," Jake announced, theatrically, as if we were preparing for some kind of holiday performance. We gathered in a circle around the tree, the same artificial one with the same decorations as when I was a child, and I watched as they opened my presents. A beautiful watch for Dad, a classic one with a leather strap and a warm metallic sheen. For Mom, a designer handbag in her favorite color, which I had been looking for weeks. For Jake and Ashley, high-end children's clothes, everything thought out to the smallest detail, right down to the organic composition of the fabrics. "Oh, they're lovely," Mom said, spinning the bag in her hands. her eyes wide with surprise. They must have cost you a fortune. Not exactly, I said softly, not wanting to go into details. Soon there was nothing left under the tree except my presents. All the other boxes were open, the wrappers scattered on the floor. I looked around expectantly. Mom's face took on an exaggerated look of shock, like a bad actress in a school play. Oh, no, Bella. We completely forgot to get you anything. Jake laughed, the same laugh I remembered from childhood, loud, mocking, and Ashley giggled behind her hand. Dad grinned, not even trying to hide it. They were all laughing at me. Yeah, Jake continued, don't start crying now. You're supposed to be an adult. But I didn't feel like crying. On the contrary, I felt something change inside me. Not pain. Not resentment. Just clarity. As if a fog had finally cleared, and for the first time I saw everything as it was, without embellishment, without hope. I'm not going to cry, I said calmly, and reached for my purse. Actually, I just bought myself a pretty nice present. I pulled out my keys and held them above my head. The silver keychain caught the morning light, reflecting it back into the eyes of the whole family. Mom frowned, her eyebrows raised. What is this supposed to be? The keys? To my new apartment, I said. I bought it last week. The room became so quiet you could hear the wooden floor creaking under the old carpet. You bought the apartment? Dad asked slowly, as if he was afraid he had misunderstood. How? With money, I answered. From work. My company just sold the system. We integrated it into the infrastructure of a major tech corporation. My share was pretty good. How good? Mom asked sharply, her voice high and guarded. I shrugged. About $150,000. The silence was almost physical. You could hear a pin drop. Jake opened his mouth as if he were going to say something, but no words came. Ashley stared at me, wide-eyed, her hand still clutching Jake's sleeve. Mom and Dad looked like I'd just announced that I'd won the lottery or that I'd married a billionaire. $150,000, Mom repeated, her voice rising with each word. What kind of job pays that much? I told you so, I said quietly, almost wearily. I'm a programmer. I work on complex projects for big tech companies. I design systems for Fortune 500 companies. Dad leaned forward in his chair, as if he wanted to get a better look at me, as if I'd suddenly become someone else entirely. How long have you been making that kind of money? He asked. Since I graduated from college. Bonuses vary, but I've been making six figures for years. Mom stood up and came over to me, and suddenly her face lit up with a smile so wide, so sophisticated, it made my insides clench. Honey, why didn't you tell us sooner? We're so proud of you. The change was instantaneous, like someone had flipped a switch. Yes, our daughter is a programmer, Dad interjected, his voice full of pride, as if it were all they're doing. Jake, did you hear that? Your sister works for a Fortune 500 company. Jake looked at me, his gaze hardening. Ashley tugged at his sleeve and whispered something quickly in his ear. So Mom continued the conversation, sitting down next to me on the couch, as if it were an ordinary evening, as if there hadn't been 8 years of silence, hurt, and unsaid things between us, as if the whole congratulations and forgotten gift scene had never happened. Tell us about this apartment of yours, she said, in a tone in which I detected an attempt at interest, albeit a little feigned. How many bedrooms does it have? I answered evenly, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. I tried to remain calm, not to give vent to the irritation that was already bubbling beneath the surface. It's in a good area, close to work, I added, shortly, matter-of-factly. That's great, Mom said, patting my knee, as if we had suddenly become friends to whom she could confide her successes and worries. You know, we should go sometime. Families should stick together. And then I almost laughed, not out loud, but somewhere deep inside, where laughter sounds bitter and silent. Family is supposed to stick together. These people hadn't bothered to find my phone number for 8 years. They hadn't found me, hadn't written to me, hadn't inquired, hadn't asked where I was, how I was, whether I was alive. And now, stick together? Actually, I said, getting up from the couch, feeling a wave of determination rise inside me, I have to go. It's a long way home. No, Mom grabbed my hand, tightly, unexpectedly tightly. You just got here. Stay a few more days. We have so much to catch up on. Dad nodded in agreement, looking like a man who suddenly realized he had a daughter. Your mom's right. We've barely had time to talk about your career. I looked at them, these people who once couldn't wait for me to go away, to be gone, to not have to explain why their daughter wasn't like their perfect son. And I went to pack. As I packed my things, zipping up my suitcase, I heard them talking hurriedly in the living room. Their voices merged into an indistinct murmur, but I caught the tone, urgent, tense, like people who suddenly realized they were missing something important. When I returned with my suitcase, they were all standing there, as if they had been set up, with identical, forced, desperate smiles that made me uneasy. Before you go, Dad began, stepping forward, we should talk about Jake's business opportunity. I narrowed my eyes, instinctively sensing where this was going. Like your brother said, he needs startup capital. And since you're doing so well. Jake stepped forward, with the same self-assurance he once used to snatch toys from me. This is a solid investment. You'll get on the ground floor. How much? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Only 200,000, he said with a slight smile. With your income, that's nothing, right? I looked at them. At Mom and Dad, who had laughed when Uncle Frank had offered me a job washing dishes at his cafe. At my brother, who had bullied me since I was a child, making fun of my every move. At his wife, who had giggled this morning like a schoolgirl laughing at a loser. No, I said. One little word. The smiles disappeared. What do you mean no? Mom demanded, her voice tense, like a string about to snap. I mean, no, I won't give you money. But we're family, Dad interjected. Family helps family. Really? I looked him straight in the eye. Where was family when you told me to go to work washing dishes? Where was family when you told me to move out the day after high school ended? That was different, Mom said sharply. We didn't have any money then. You had money for Jake's college, I pointed out calmly. Jake showed a lot of promise, she snapped, and then, noticing how that sounded, she quickly added, I mean, we thought you'd be better off working, right? I took a deep breath. Well, I have to go, I said, heading for the door. You're selfish, Jake suddenly exploded, after everything this family has done for you. I stopped and turned around. What exactly have you done for me? I asked. We raised you, Mom said, fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head. That's the bare minimum, I said quietly, but every word was like a nail. And you made it clear to me every day that I was unwanted. I walked toward the door, suitcase in hand. They followed me, still arguing. You're going to regret this. Mom yelled. When you need us, don't come back crying. I won't, I said, and I meant it. I drove away from that house and didn't look back. My heart beat calmly as the car pulled out of the driveway. But not even 15 minutes passed before my phone rang. Mom. Dad. Jake. One after another. I declined them all. Then the text started. Mom, please think again. Jake really needs this opportunity. Dad, don't be stubborn. This is about family. Jake, you owe us. Think about everything we've sacrificed for you. I got to the first stop, got up, opened my phone settings, and blocked all of their numbers. Back in my new apartment, I slowly opened a bottle of dry red wine, poured myself a generous glass, and sat on the balcony, stretching my legs out on a wicker ottoman, enjoying the light evening breeze that brought with it the smells of summer greenery, evening asphalt, and echoes of distant conversations. The lights of the city twinkled below, as if every little light in the window was proof that I finally belonged to myself, that this was my life, my territory, my space, in which there was no place for those who had spent my entire youth telling me that I was superfluous. My phone vibrated, and I was almost not surprised to see that it was Sarah. I heard what happened. "I feel sorry for them," she wrote. I took a slow sip and responded without even thinking, "Don't. This is the best Christmas present they could have given me. Freedom from the guilt of cutting them off." She sent a laughing emoji, behind which I could easily imagine her face, kind, understanding, the only sincere one in days. "Your mother already tells everyone that you are selfish and ungrateful," she continued. "Let them," I wrote briefly, without anger, without pain. Just a statement of fact. Now they can say whatever they want. It no longer hurts me. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, maybe even years. My own bed, in my own apartment, the silence unburdened by expectations, and not a single reminder that I should be different. In the morning, I woke up to the vibration of my phone. But these were not calls from blocked numbers. No, now the supporting actors entered the scene. The messages came from aunts, uncles, cousins, and sisters I barely knew. "Your mother told us what happened. How could you leave your family?" They wrote, as if they were suddenly participants in a drama no one asked to be filmed. "Jake is trying to build something. You need to support him. We always knew you were selfish." Without reading further, I began blocking them all out, one by one, like drawing curtains on a window you never open. Everyone, except Sarah. She called me later that afternoon. She had that slight southern accent that always made me think of summer and jasmine. "Oh, my God, Bella," she said, "the whole family is going crazy. Your mom's been calling everyone and telling them you're rich and you don't want to help Jake." "Good for you," I said, and even smiled. "They say you've forgotten where you came from." "Of course you have," I sighed. They can't believe that the girl they ignored could have accomplished anything. Sarah paused for a second, and then said softly, "Truly, sincerely, I'm proud of you. No matter what it takes." "It takes a lot," I told her, and my heart suddenly felt warm. "You're the only family I want to keep in touch with." "Are you really okay with alienating everyone else?" she asked after a pause. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I cut them off 8 years ago. It was just a formal statement." That night, I met some friends at our favorite wine bar, a cozy spot on a street corner where they always had soft music playing and knew my favorite beers without asking. We sat by the window and I told them everything, no embellishments, no drama, just how it was. Lisa, without mincing words, sat back in her chair and said, "Good riddance. They sound toxic as hell." Another friend, Dan, looked at me over the rim of his glass and asked, "Are you going to miss them?" I thought about it as a woman walked past holding a child's hand, and I said, "You know, I don't think I will. I think I've been mourning the family I never had for years now." That's where it ends. I raised my glass, feeling something release inside, like the chains I wore on my soul were beginning to crumble. "To the chosen family," I said. "To the chosen family," they said back, and the crunch of the crystal was mixed with a light laugh and a calm. My phone vibrated, again. An unknown number. I knew with all my skin, that they were looking for new ways, new phones to get to me. I simply switched the volume to silent and focused on the faces in front of me, the ones who truly cared, who were there not because of their last name or their biology, but because they chose to. It had been 6 months since that Christmas disaster, and my life had honestly never been better. Summer had arrived and I was sitting on the balcony with my morning coffee, watching the city wake up. The windows were starting to light up, the streets were coming alive, and I felt like I had finally emerged from the fog I'd been living in for most of my life without even realizing it. Sarah called me about once a week, just to share news. Not because I asked, but because she knew that if something really important happened, I'd want to know. Most of the time, it was the same old drama, just in new variations. "The last time we talked," she said, "Jake had a daughter last month. They named her Madison." "That's great," I said, and I meant it. I hoped that this little girl would have a better childhood than I did. According to Sarah, Jake and Ashley were still living with my parents. That big entrepreneurial dream he'd talked about with such pathos hadn't come true. I know, it's shocking, Sarah added wryly. He continued to talk about his business plans at every family gathering, but, she said, the family was tired of listening. With no real progress, with the same promises and no results, even Jake's most loyal supporters, the same relatives who used to pat him on the back and call him a business genius, were finally asking uncomfortable questions. What had once been a cheerful discussion of a revolutionary idea over punch became an irritating topic, increasingly met with forced smiles or diplomatic silence. And my parents, as I learned from Sarah, had turned Mike and betrayal into a favorite sob story, which they repeated at every family gathering with almost theatrical pathos. They told anyone who would listen how their ungrateful daughter had abandoned them, forgetting all their sacrifices and care, erasing me from the context and rewriting the story to show them as the victims and me as the cold, calculating traitor. Meanwhile, everything in my life was going almost unbelievably well, as if the universe had decided at some point to make up for those years of loneliness and invisibility. 3 months had passed since that unforgettable Christmas when I met Nathan. It was completely by chance, in a cozy coffee shop where I usually got a latte to go in the mornings before work, and he was sitting by the window with a laptop, leaning over some logo. We started talking, first about coffee, then about design, technology, life, and it turned out that he was a graphic designer with a refined taste and a rare understanding of other people's silence. He immediately understood why I had cut ties with my toxic family, did not judge, did not ask questions, simply said, I had my own history with difficult relatives. I understand. And that was enough for me to feel, here is a person who does not require me to be someone else. At work, everything was also going brilliantly. I was promoted to lead architect of a new project related to the integration of AI. The raise was nice, sure, but to be honest, I was more excited by the technical challenges, the complex algorithms, the system's architecture, and the thrill of it all finally working. My team respected me, my boss openly praised my contributions, and I felt like I was creating something meaningful, that my knowledge, my passion, my obsession with detail were resonating. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evenings, I found myself wondering if I should tell my parents after all. About the raise, about Nathan, about the patents I'd filed and those pending. And then I'd remember how they'd laughed when Uncle Frank offered me a job washing dishes, and all desire would vanish. The last real attempt at contact from my family had been about a month ago. Jake, somehow, had gotten hold of a new phone number and called me directly. Hey, sis, he said, trying to sound casual, with that false cheerfulness I recognized instantly. I thought we should catch up. What do you want, Jake? I asked, not seeing the point in the vagueness. He cleared his throat. Look, I know things are tense over Christmas, but we're a family. Madison would love to meet her aunt. You mean your daughter needs a rich aunt? I asked. That's not normal. He hesitated. Okay. Things are tough right now. Ashley's out of work because of the baby, and Mom and Dad need some renovations they can't afford. A small loan would help. No, you have no idea. Whatever, I said. The answer is still no. He lost it. He exploded. He started calling me every name he could think of, as if that would shake my resolve. I listened in silence until I'd had enough and hung up, then blocked that number too. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, the girl who'd grown up feeling like an outsider in my own family, convinced there was something wrong with me, now had a job I loved, friends who genuinely valued me, a man who accepted me unconditionally, and a home filled with light and love. All the things my family had told me I could never have because I was too weird, too quiet, too antisocial. My success wasn't just financial, though that was certainly nice. It was deep, emotional, hard-won. I built a life surrounded by people who truly loved me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. Sarah recently told me that my old bedroom, the one Jake used as an office, was now being turned into Madison's nursery. My childhood space was disappearing, and to my surprise, it didn't hurt the way I thought it would. Because, if I'm being honest, that room had never really been mine. just like that house had never been my home. My real home was here, where I decorated every wall, where my friends gathered for movie nights and dinners, where Nathan and I spent lazy Sunday mornings lying on the couch, chatting or coding together, taking turns feeding each other cereal. This was a life I had built, not with permission, not under the pressure of someone else's expectations, but with my own hands, out of love and pain and strength and clarity. Piece by piece, step by step, while my family was busy telling me I'd never amount to anything. Sometimes, in those rare, barely perceptible moments when it seemed that the past had finally dissolved into the present, it would suddenly remind of itself, not head-on, not noisily, but through those very flying monkeys, as I jokingly called them. Distant relatives or old family acquaintances who, apparently, decided that they had a special gift of persuasion and could return me to a reasonable state, set me on the path of family reconciliation, press on a sense of duty, memories, cultivate politeness where they themselves had once refused love. Most of all, I was struck when Aunt Helen, the same one who once advised me not to do boring work, left a voice message with a heartfelt intonation. "Family is forever, Bella. You can't just leave." But the thing is, I had already left. Left not with noise, not with curses, not with screams, but quietly, firmly, finally. And with each passing day, I became more and more convinced that this was the best decision in my life. Nathan and I were planning a trip to Japan. And although my life had already had many bright moments, this trip, which we prepared for together, like two inspired explorers, seemed especially exciting. We studied the language together, wrote out hieroglyphs in notebooks over a cup of green tea, looked for authentic restaurants, planned routes through temples and gardens, discussed what souvenirs we would bring back to our friends. I, with a light heart, posted a photo of our travel notes on social networks, simply because I was happy and wanted to share it. A couple of days later, Sarah wrote to me that my mother had seen these photos through her cousin's account and had already started another campaign. "It turns out that you prefer to spend money on a vacation instead of helping your family." Hearing this, I just shrugged my shoulders. "Okay," I said. "Maybe someday they'll realize I'm never coming back." Last week, my boss called me into his office. I thought it would be a routine meeting, maybe to discuss a project, but it turned out I was getting another promotion, this time to head up the entire engineering department. That salary would easily put me in the top 1%, the highest earning people my age. But what stuck with me most was his words. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You've earned it. Your work speaks for itself." I felt something inside me straighten. First, I called Nathan, then my friends, and we had a spontaneous evening at that same sushi bar that had long been our favorite place. We laughed, clinked glasses, ate too many sushi rolls, and talked about new beginnings, about chosen family, the one we create ourselves. Lisa, as always, couldn't resist making a snarky joke. "Your parents probably sense a disturbance in the force every time your bank account grows." I chuckled and replied, "They can sense whatever they want. They won't get a cent." Later, back at home, Nathan and I were sitting on the balcony. He brought a bottle of champagne to celebrate my promotion, in private, as he put it, and we watched the city lights reflect off the glasses. "You know what I like about us?" he asked, turning to me. "We're building something real. Not just dreaming about it like your brother." "Speaking of building," I said, smiling, "I was thinking about buying a house. Something with a yard. Maybe an office." "Sounds perfect," he replied. "As long as it has good internet for our coding sessions." We clinked glasses and started talking about the neighborhood, the layout, dreaming about the dogs that would greet us at the door. This was something I'd never been able to talk about with my birth family, because they'd always seen me as a burden. And later, a bank account. My phone vibrated. A text from Sarah. "Your mom keeps telling everyone you're probably a drug dealer. That's why you have so much money but don't want to help your family." I showed the text to Nathan, and we both laughed. "Should I tell them the truth?" I asked, laughing through a little weariness. "That I've succeeded because I worked hard while they were busy playing favorites." "Why bother?" he replied calmly. "They'll believe what they want to believe anyway." He was right. My family had written their own story about me long ago. A story about a weird kid who couldn't make friends. A withdrawn daughter who didn't fit into their image of the perfect family. A cruel, selfish sister who turned her back on her family. The truth didn't fit into this drama, and so it was rejected. But now I had my own story. A story in which a weird kid grew up to become a respected engineer, building complex systems for the world's leading companies. Where an antisocial daughter found people with whom she could be real, quiet, passionate, sometimes tired, but always accepted. Where a selfish sister realized that putting yourself first is not cruelty, but an act of survival. Because the alternative is letting toxic people tear you down over and over again. And I chose differently. I chose to live.